The hunter was aiming at an extremely rare snow deer in the forest. As he prepared to pull the trigger, he suddenly changed his mind. He didn't want to harm the pure creature anymore. Lowering his gun, he slowly approached the deer, fearing it might be frightened and run away. But just as he got close and reached out to pet the deer, a bullet unexpectedly flew through its body, causing it to collapse on the white snow. A young man suddenly ran up, his face beaming with joy, boasting of his victory. Dexter recognized the man who had shot the deer as Matt. Matt was completely unaware that he had just messed with a notorious killer. It turned out that this hunter was a notorious underworld assassin, the one who had shocked America 10 years earlier. Matt's shot had even narrowly missed Dexter. This enraged him. He immediately knocked Matt unconscious with the butt of his gun. He intended to slit Matt's throat with his knife, but then hesitated, realizing he hadn't been an assassin for many years. If Dexter were to take action this time, he had to make sure Matt died in a way befitting his reputation as a top assassin. He couldn't let Matt die too easily. 10 years had passed since Dexter retired from the underworld and disappeared from Miami. He decided to abandon his past as a skilled assassin and move to a small town. He changed his name to Jim Lindsay to conceal his identity. He lived harmoniously with the locals and worked at a hunting supply store. However, sometimes Dexter couldn't control his bloodlust. Prime example was when he saw the butcher slaughtering a pig. The red blood flowing onto the floor, and each slicing of the knife made him feel uneasy. But he still tried to suppress his urges and returned to his work. On his way home, he was stopped by a female police officer for a document check. Suddenly, she lunged at him, embracing and kissing him passionately. Immediately afterward, they engaged in intimate moments in the car. Since Dexter met Officer Angela, his life had become richer and more colorful. However, this seemingly peaceful life ended when, during a hunting trip, Dexter confronted Matt, the son of a powerful businessman in town. A few days earlier, Matt had come to Dexter's shop to buy a knife and a hunting rifle. Matt was arrogant, but according to regulations, Dexter was required to check the buyer's record before selling. Matt's record contained a black mark. He had caused a boat accident that killed 5 people. Thanks to his father's influence, he had escaped punishment. This greatly annoyed Dexter, but he tried to remain calm and not show his emotions. So, reluctantly, he had to obey his boss and deliver the goods to Matt's house. At that moment, Matt was having a noisy party. Naturally, it was full of delinquent youths. A drug-addicted man led Dexter inside. When Matt received the new hunting rifle, he became extremely agitated. Matt taunted Dexter by pointing the gun at him. In a flash, Dexter struck Matt, knocking him unconscious. That night, Dexter planned to kill the unpunished criminals. He would make Matt his first victim in years since his retirement. But the image of his deceased sister flashed through his mind, as if urging him to restrain himself. Dexter decided to ignore it and continue living as normal. The next morning, he went hunting in the forest as usual. Actually, his main purpose was to see the snow deer. It wasn't just a random animal, but also a symbol of purity. It was what kept Dexter tied to the honest life he was trying to build. But everything crumbled the moment Matt shot the deer. Dexter couldn't hold back any longer. After knocking Matt unconscious, he returned home to prepare his tools. First, he covered the walls and floor with plastic wrap to prevent blood from splattering. Then he spread out a black tarp and tied the unconscious Matt tightly to a table. Matt woke up and realized Dexter intended to kill him, and he was terrified. He struggled, begged, and pleaded that Dexter shouldn't do this just because of a deer. But Dexter had wanted to kill Matt for a long time, so he wasn't going to let him off easily. Matt became even more desperate when he learned that Dexter was a serial killer. Dexter's expression of ecstatic murder terrified Matt. With a single knife thrust, the bloodthirsty angel Dexter reappeared. He used a chainsaw to dismember Matt's body, stuffing the parts into plastic bags to dispose of them. Upon returning, he found a strange young man standing at his door. The young man introduced himself as Harrison and claimed to be Dexter's son. Dexter was extremely confused and initially told Harrison to leave. However, after some thought, Dexter decided to go and meet his son and bring him home. The next morning, while Harrison was still asleep, Dexter ran out into the yard to cover up the blood still clinging to the snow. Suddenly, police cars arrived, causing him some anxiety. News of Matt's disappearance while he was hunting had reached the police. They had asked to set up camp in Dexter's yard to search for Matt, as his house was closest to the hunting grounds. He breathed a sigh of relief, as he was temporarily free from suspicion. Furthermore, since Officer Angela was Dexter's girlfriend, he found it even easier to evade suspicion. When Dexter saw the police splitting up to search for Matt, he became somewhat worried. He feared he might have left behind some clues, so he pretended to offer to help his son. However, when the police used a drone to search from above, Dexter immediately used a radar jammer, causing the drone to crash before it could fly far. Next, Dexter and Harrison drove into the forest where Matt was murdered. Dexter deliberately steered the car so that the wheels ran over the bloodstains and buried them in the snow. As they passed a row of trees, Harrison Harrison discovered the carcass of a snow deer. Dexter, feigning tension, said that hunting in the area was illegal and instructed his son to drive back to inform the police while he would stay to guard the scene. Meanwhile, Angela went to Matt's house to inform his father about the search. As a prominent businessman, Kurt remained remarkably calm. Even with his only son missing, he showed no signs of worry. After Angela borrowed Kurt's search helicopter for the investigation, she quickly left. Dexter was trying to remember if there were any other clues at the scene. He recalled that when Matt fell, he had hit his head on a rock, so he used a stick to lift it up. Sure enough, there was still blood on it. Dexter felt lucky, because if the police found this piece of evidence, they would surely discover something. Next, he sprayed disinfectant and wiped the blood off the rock. Then Dexter ran to the edge of the woods near the highway and threw away a glove that Matt had worn during the hunt to mislead the investigation. When Dexter returned to the scene, many people had gathered around the deer carcass. Dexter was pleased that so many people were at the scene. This would certainly obscure the evidence and make things more difficult for the police. He then blamed Matt, claiming he was the one responsible. The hunters were furious. Just then, Angela arrived with a group of officers to assess the situation. The hunters speculated that after killing the snow deer, Matt might have panicked and fled towards the highway. Everything unfolded exactly as Dexter had planned. Matt had previously purchased the gun and ammunition at the store where Dexter worked, allowing Dexter to suggest the police investigate. Later, another officer discovered Matt's glove, which Dexter had intentionally left behind. At this point, the police believed everything was clear and quickly left. Harrison, impressed by his father's suggestion to the police, even asked why Dexter had left behind a police officer. He had no idea that his father was a serial killer. Soon after, the deer carcass was brought back to Dexter's house. The police asked the butcher to check if it was indeed the deer Matt had shot. Sure enough, after a search, he found a bullet that matched the type Matt had bought from Dexter. That night, Dexter finally breathed a sigh of relief when Angela announced they were stopping the search for Matt. They concluded that he had fled out of fear of punishment after shooting the deer. Everyone was fooled by Dexter's plan, but the joy was short-lived, as trouble soon arose. When Kurt learned that the police had stopped searching for his son, he immediately confronted Angela. Because Angela was the town's sheriff, she had to explain everything and reassure Kurt. She said that Matt might be out partying somewhere and would be back soon. But Kurt knew Matt better than anyone. If Matt got into trouble, he would definitely call Kurt. Because Kurt was very powerful in this town, Matt had no reason to be afraid and run away. Although Kurt was arrogant, he had actually made many contributions to the town. So when Kurt pleaded with everyone to continue searching for Matt, Angela reluctantly sent more police into the woods. The next morning, Angela discovered a new clue and immediately ordered all the police back to the station. Hearing this, Dexter was a little worried. He didn't know if he had missed anything at the scene that would give the police more evidence. So, he pretended to go to the police station to invite Angela to lunch. There, the receptionist revealed that they had found the video footage of Matt shooting the deer. Dexter was stunned. If there were cameras there, the entire scene of him knocking Matt unconscious would have been recorded. Just then, Angela came out and called Dexter into the office. Luckily, the cameras only recorded thermal imaging, not clear images. Therefore, the police only wanted Dexter to confirm whether the gun in the video was the one he had sold to Matt. However, the video showed another person near the scene. Of course, they didn't know that person was Dexter. Seeing this, Kurt immediately requested a check of the camera to get a clearer view of that person's face. But luck was on Dexter's side. His position coincided with a blind spot of the camera. Even so, he couldn't let his guard down, because the police had decided to reinvestigate from the beginning, suspecting it was a case. Shortly afterward, a forensic expert arrived at the scene. He discovered some strange blood stains and proceeded to examine them. As expected, the results showed it was Matt's blood. However, someone had mixed it with deer blood. Based on the blood stains, the forensic expert was able to reconstruct the events as if he had witnessed the entire incident. Naturally, encountering such an intelligent person made Dexter extremely tense. He feared being exposed. That evening, he learned from Angela that they would send a team of sniffer dogs to search the hunting grounds the next morning. From here, Dexter began to worry and thought about transporting the rest of Matt's body elsewhere. While Harrison was asleep, Dexter slowly dug the soil beneath the outdoor wood-burning stove where he had hidden Matt's body. But Dexter didn't move Matt's body. He only took his jacket and brought it to the scene. He then created fake tracks throughout the forest so that when the police dogs sniffed the area, they would be confused because the scent of the victim would be everywhere. At the same time, elsewhere, a girl was locked in a room with 24/7 surveillance cameras. Through the screen, a masked man was observing her every move. After putting on his mask, he pressed a remote control button, causing the door to open. Immediately, she jumped up and tried to escape, but before she could get far, the stranger stranger fired a shot, causing her to fall motionless. Dexter was in the forest and heard the gunshot, but he thought it was just hunters shooting, so he quickly returned home for fear of being discovered. Afterwards, the killer carefully cleaned up the girl's body. He inserted a needle into the corpse and drained all the red blood into a bucket. As Dexter was preparing to take his son to school, the police arrived at his door. Although Angela didn't suspect Dexter, she still requested that everyone who had spoken to Matt before his disappearance be questioned. At the same time, at the crime scene, the police brought in sniffer dogs to search the area. Dexter went with them to the station to give his statement. Through this, he realized he needed to act faster, so he decided to go to the iron mine 5 kilometers away to see if it was safe enough to hide Matt's body. He used skis to avoid leaving footprints. Not far away, Harrison and his classmates were on their way home when their car broke down. Harrison had to walk to town to find a mechanic, leaving Adria to wait. Just then, the billionaire Edward passed by and stopped to ask if Adria needed any help. It turned out the girl had once led a protest against his company for polluting the town. Because Adria was the daughter of Sheriff Angela, he didn't dare do anything to her. Of course, she refused, as she disliked this devious billionaire. Meanwhile, Dexter had entered the mine tunnel and discovered a pit deep enough to safely dispose of Matt's body. But unexpectedly, he saw a black bear lurking inside. Terrified, he ran away. That evening, while the 4 of them were having dinner, Angela's daughter suggested cremating the unfortunate deer to give it a proper burial. Dexter took on the task of transporting its carcass to the snowy forest in the hunting grounds. On his way back, Dexter encountered Kurt drunk on the side of the road. Dexter felt a pang of guilt, so he stopped to question Kurt. In his drunken state, Kurt claimed he'd received a call from his son. Matt was still alive. Anyone else might have believed him, but Dexter knew Kurt was lying. Back home, he called Angela to tell her what he'd heard so she could close the case quickly. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the old man seemed overjoyed. He went to the police station boasting that he'd contacted his son. Everyone believed him and rushed out to congratulate him. As usual, Angela had to give her statement. Kurt answered quickly and asked the police to stop the investigation because Matt was partying in New York. However, Angela couldn't believe him immediately. She asked her subordinates to check Matt's credit cards because if he was at a hotel, he'd definitely have spent money. Only a transaction could prove Matt was still alive. Like Angela, Dexter suspected Kurt was hiding something, so Dexter secretly followed Kurt. More than anyone else, only Dexter knew Kurt was lying, and he was trying to figure out why. When he returned to work, Dexter received news from the school that Harrison had been attacked with a knife by a classmate. Watching his son's testimony to the police was like seeing a reflection of his own past self. Finally, Dexter's worst fear came true. Dexter's violent, murderous genes had been passed on to Harrison. While Harrison appeared frightened, he actually felt a sense of satisfaction from the fight. To uncover the truth, Dexter went to the police station to find more photos of the school attack. It turned out the knife used to stab Harrison had been bought by Fred, the father of the attacker. Initially, Ethan intended to stab Andre, but somehow Ethan ended up fighting with Harrison, despite their close friendship. At this time, Kurt had returned to his normal life. A girl in difficult circumstances sought his help. Because Kurt was known for his charitable work in town, he took her to a house not far from town and offered her shelter. The girl was overjoyed to find decent accommodation. She didn't realize she had fallen into a trap. In reality, Kurt was also a murderer. Somehow, Kurt had forged Matt's payment transaction, making the police completely believe that he was still alive. Furious that Matt was out partying while everyone was searching for him in the cold night, Angela decided to go to the city to find him. After discovering she was locked in the house and seeing the camera, she panicked, realizing she had fallen into Kurt's trap. After Dexter received a call from the police, he quickly went to the hospital to check on Harrison's condition. According to the story, a few hours earlier, the boy had attended a party and had drugs secretly put in his drink by a bad friend. Because the drugs bought from the black market were not guaranteed, he went into shock and had to be hospitalized. Therefore, Dexter decided to track down the drug dealers in town who had sold this harmful substance. Sitting in a bar, he saw 2 thugs trading drugs. When one of them approached, Dexter pretended to ask to buy flour from him. Thinking he was serious about buying, Miles enthusiastically offered advice and called him outside to get the goods. When the man bent down, Dexter intended to inject him with a tranquilizer. But seeing the police approaching, he immediately changed his plan. He pretended to punch Miles as if venting anger on behalf of his son. This didn't arouse any suspicion from the police. Then he and the thug were taken to the police station. The thug was questioned by the police for drug trafficking that harmed the town's youth. From the thug's confession, the police tracked down the drug manufacturer, a man named Jasper. Afterward, Dexter pretended to hug the receptionist to get Jasper's address. After Kurt had his prey trapped, he sat back and enjoyed watching her terrified reactions. But things didn't go as planned. She wasn't scared at all. Instead, she undressed in front of the camera to lure him closer, then tried to escape. Kurt was furious because it didn't go according to his plan, so he decided it was time to hunt. He pretended to press the door open button, waiting for the girl to run out so he could shoot her. However, the girl wasn't stupid. She deliberately provoked him to lure him to her. She had a piece of glass hidden under her pillow for self-defense. Due to the difference in strength, Kurt easily dragged her outside and then went back inside to get his gun. Furious that his plan had been ruined, he shot her on the spot. Meanwhile, Dexter arrived at Jasper's residence. Dexter sneaked into the house through the bathroom. He then retrieved the prepared drug and quietly searched premises. As Jasper approached, Dexter immediately knocked him unconscious. When he woke up and found himself tied to a table, he panicked just as Matt had been when Dexter killed him. Dexter was about to bring the knife down when he suddenly spotted Officer Logan standing at the door, but he didn't stop and shoved a large quantity of drugs down Jasper's nostrils. After Jasper was dead, Dexter moved his body back to his apartment. The police arrived a step too late. Since Angela went to New York to talk to Matt, she had realized that Kurt had sent a stranger to impersonate his son and falsify the transaction, but she still didn't understand why he would lie. At this time, Kurt encountered Harrison, sulking and wandering the streets. Kurt used his old trick of pretending to be kind to his target. After Kurt treated Harrison to a meal, he began to provoke him, causing the boy to become increasingly conflicted with his father. Dexter didn't understand why his son's behavior was becoming so strange. He was unaware that his identity had been revealed, because Andre had told Angela that before Harrison passed out from being high on drugs, he had said his father wasn't Jim Lindsay. Using her police skills, Angela quickly found Dexter's real file. So when Angela encountered Dexter on patrol, she asked to see his real identification. Knowing his identity had been revealed, he reluctantly went with her to the police station and explained why he had changed his name and was on the run. His ex-wife and sister had both been murdered, which led him to become a serial killer. However, he had a principle: he only killed those who were guilty. In contrast to Dexter, Kurt was a man who preferred to target innocent and vulnerable girls. He had chosen a new victim, a girl in difficult circumstances begging for money, but the victim slipped away because she was with her boyfriend. Meanwhile, Angela exposed Kurt's lie, but Logan didn't believe Kurt could do such a thing. Kurt was known for helping the weak and being very kind. Angela, on the other hand, believed Kurt had killed his son. She reasoned that when Kurt learned Matt had shot the deer, he was furious. Therefore, in a moment of situkonja, loss of control, he might have accidentally killed his son and hidden the body. They decided to investigate discreetly the next morning, starting with him. At the same time, Dexter also wanted to know why Kurt was lying. So, Dexter secretly placed a recording device to monitor Kurt. When Dexter saw Kurt luring another young woman to the cabin, his suspicions grew. He decided to follow them to Kurt's secluded house. Being a seasoned assassin, Kurt sensed something was wrong the moment he saw her. The girl being brought inside was terrified. Just as Kurt was about to strike, Dexter unexpectedly opened the door, interrupting him. Dexter pretended to walk by. Before Kurt could refuse, Dexter pushed the door open and entered. With just a glance, Dexter recognized the installed camera system and realized the sealed room was perfectly suited for holding a victim captive. He quickly made an excuse to take the girl away. This infuriated Kurt, whose plan had once again failed. His wicked deeds were gradually exposed when Angela and her subordinates arrived at the old mine, the place where Kurt had hidden the victim's body. Thanks to a remaining bracelet, Angela recognized her friend who had gone missing many years ago. It turned out the girl had been murdered long ago. Angela understood that the only person who could help her now was Dexter, so she called him. With his previous forensic experience, he was able to identify the murder weapon just by looking at the body. From the victim's teeth, he also discovered a piece of skin containing the killer's DNA. Therefore, he immediately gave it to Angela to take back for examination. In truth, Angela suspected Kurt was behind it all, but she wasn't yet certain. Next, Dexter took her to Kurt's secret house, which he had accidentally discovered earlier. When they entered, everything had been cleaned up. It was completely different from when Dexter had been there. They temporarily put their investigation on hold to avoid being discovered by the killer. Dexter used the excuse of visiting Harrison's part-time job to investigate Kurt inside the store. Just as they finished speaking, Angela arrived with her subordinates and ordered Kurt's arrest. Because the DNA matched, Kurt was accused of murder from 25 years ago. At this moment, Dexter was overjoyed to see Kurt being escorted away. Since they were both predators, Dexter recognized Kurt's tactics, especially his attempts to approach his son. Despite his reputation as a harmless man in town, everyone was surprised when Kurt was arrested by the police right in his own store. Finally, the mystery surrounding the death of Angela's best friend years ago was solved. For over 20 years, her friend's disappearance had caused a stir in the small town. Everyone thought she had run away to the city. No one suspected Kurt had kidnapped and murdered Iris. So, when Angela received Dexter's message, she didn't pay much attention attention to it. Later, Angela went to the interrogation room to give her statement. In response to her questions, Kurt still denied everything. He insisted he had done nothing wrong and that the police had made a mistake. But Angela quickly exposed his lie. Matt hadn't contacted her and wasn't at the hotel, as Kurt had claimed. However, Kurt quickly changed the subject. At this point, she noticed a scar on his hand. He casually said it was from an accidental cut while working. At this point, Angela decided to reveal the truth. It turned out that Kurt had given the blood sample to the police because of Matt's disappearance. Now, it had turned into a double-edged sword. The DNA match made it impossible for Kurt to deny it, but he still demanded to speak with a lawyer. Since Kurt's arrest, Harrison had been extremely upset. This was because Harrison had been manipulated by Kurt. Harrison had always thought Kurt was a good person. While Harrison was loading goods at the warehouse, a man gave him a letter and asked him to deliver it to Dexter. When Harrison returned home, he quickly told his father about it, but when Dexter opened the envelope, he only found a small medical nail and no letter. He immediately guessed that the messenger was one of Kurt's employees. It was sent to warn him. That same night, Dexter waited outside the police station. When no one was inside, he sneaked into the cell to meet Kurt privately. Dexter warned Kurt not to instill murderous intentions in his son anymore. But as soon as Dexter finished speaking, Kurt burst out laughing. Kurt cursed Dexter, saying they were both the same kind of people and didn't need to pretend. Kurt said he had known Dexter was the murderer of his son from the night he found Dexter drunk. The nail Dexter received was from Matt's body. Because Matt had broken his leg, he had to use a titanium nail to fix it. Titanium is fire resistant. When Kurt picked up this nail, he was certain Dexter was the one who killed Matt. Kurt deliberately misled the police so he could take matters into his own hands and avenge his son. Dexter returned home, his heart filled with anxiety. This was clearly a subtle warning that Kurt would kill Harrison to get revenge. Therefore, Dexter decided to pay a little more attention to Harrison. Dexter offered to drive Harrison to work. After the case, which had been solved years earlier, was brought to light, the family of the murdered girl was devastated. People from the village also came to comfort them. After meeting with Dexter, Kurt changed his mind. He no longer denied the crime and asked to give a statement to the police. Kurt stood in front of the camera and began to recount his distorted childhood. He was born and raised in a family where his violent father constantly beat him, which gradually developed a twisted psychology. That day, while returning from refueling, he saw Iris getting into a car with his father. According to Kurt, his father only advised Iris to go home, but she resisted. Then, she jumped out of the car and ran away. In a fit of rage, Kurt's father took out a gun and shot her, causing her to collapse on the road. Therefore, Kurt confessed that his father had murdered the girl and that the DNA sample belonged to his father, not him. Coincidentally, the forensic pathologist also brought a DNA test report that only matched 67%, not over 90%. Therefore, his confession was credible. In this way, Kurt easily escaped suspicion and the murder charge. At this time, Dexter also received news that Kurt had been released. Dexter realized Kurt's plan was incredibly sophisticated. Kurt had made Dexter think he had won, but in reality, Kurt was always one step ahead of Dexter. Dexter then sneaked into Kurt's office to investigate the clues. He searched and searched, but found nothing suspicious. While accidentally turning a picture frame on the wall, he unexpectedly caused a drawer to automatically open. Inside was an envelope. Dexter opened it and found a bank check in Eric's name. However, this clue was still beyond his comprehension. Outside, he overheard two neighbors talking. In their eyes, Kurt was a good person, so his release only proved his innocence. Only Dexter understood just how dangerous Kurt was. Dexter was determined to kill Kurt before he could harm Harrison and the other girls. As soon as Kurt was released, he tracked the girl he had intended to kill the day before. At that moment, Harrison was taking out the trash when he encountered three burly male students causing trouble. This was because Harrison had previously clashed with one of their gang members. However, he wasn't afraid. His face clearly showed murderous intent. Just as Harrison swung his utility knife at the thugs, Dexter rushed to stop his son. Harrison was furious because Dexter always thought of him as a bad person. Dexter didn't know that Harrison was defending himself because he was being bullied by his friends. When he saw his son leave, he tried to chase after him, but was suddenly attacked from behind by a stranger. They knocked him unconscious and carried him into a car. In his delirium, Dexter saw Harrison fighting with his friends, wielding a knife and relentlessly attacking them. Furthermore, Dexter saw the bloodthirsty demon within Harrison, identical to himself. They seemed to find satisfaction in killing others. When Dexter regained consciousness, he found himself tied up. The driver called Kurt. From this, Dexter deduced that this was Eric, the man Kurt had hired to stalk and kidnap him. But as soon as Eric hung up, Dexter managed to overpower him from behind, giving him no time to react. Luckily, the car lost control and crashed into a lamppost, the force of which threw Dexter out, saving him from certain death. Dexter tried to untie himself and escape, but the driver was still alive. He grabbed a hunting rifle rifle and intended to shoot Dexter. Therefore, Dexter had to flee into the snowy forest. However, Eric wasn't about to let Dexter go. He followed the blood trail towards where Dexter was hiding. This was Dexter's first experience of being hunted. After bandaging his leg wound, he continued running, but soon Eric caught up with Dexter, firing at him. When he reached the frozen river, an idea suddenly struck him. He stepped back so Eric could see his footprints. Eric thought he had fallen into an ice pit. Dexter silently prayed he would escape, but Eric wasn't easily fooled. Taking advantage of Eric's momentary lapse of vigilance, Dexter ran into the campsite to wait for an opportunity to counterattack. Dexter deliberately left a trail of blood to lure Eric there. Next, Dexter broke into the house and found a knife to use as a weapon. It wasn't until nightfall that Eric found the house. He calmly walked inside, unaware of the death waiting within. He confidently walked around with his gun, searching for Dexter's whereabouts. But in a moment of carelessness, Eric was attacked and pinned to the ground by Dexter. Dexter asked Eric where Kurt intended to take Harrison. Because Dexter knew Kurt had planned to harm him, Eric's son was certainly in danger as well. Terrified, Eric revealed the location Kurt had taken Harrison. After Eric finished speaking, Dexter stabbed him in the left chest, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Harrison remained unaware of his father's kidnapping. Having just argued with his father, he wandered aimlessly in the streets. Suddenly, Kurt called Harrison, and he began plotting a provocation. This further strained the father-son relationship. Clearly, in the eyes of a teenager like Harrison, Kurt, who supported all his opinions, was more likable than his constantly nagging father. Understanding this crucial point, Kurt tried to befriend Harrison. He took Harrison to the baseball field and taught him how to play, something his father had never done. This little act of feigned sincerity easily won Harrison's trust. Not stopping there, Kurt took Harrison home and cooked him a local specialty. Just as Kurt turned away, Harrison received a text message from his father. Dexter told Harrison to run away immediately and not believe Kurt. Seeing this, Harrison temporarily excused himself to go outside to reply to the message, but he dismissed his father's words as nonsense. Harrison was about to text Dexter back when Kurt called him back inside for dinner. Harrison switched to do not disturb mode and ignored Dexter's warning. Because Dexter didn't receive a response from his son, he became extremely worried because he knew that if he didn't act quickly, his son would die. And just as he suspected, the seemingly warm atmosphere at the dinner table between Kurt and Harrison was actually a cruel plan. Suddenly, Kurt excused himself to go to the restroom. Harrison also took the opportunity to check his phone and discovered several missed calls from Dexter, but he didn't care. When Harrison happily looked up to call Kurt, he found Kurt standing in front of him with a gun. At this point, Harrison was terrified and did everything Kurt demanded. Harrison begged for his life, but Kurt tricked Harrison into thinking that if he ran fast, he wouldn't be killed. Just as Kurt was about to pull the trigger, a car approached, interrupting him. Kurt thought Eric had arrived. Kurt was surprised to see Dexter behind the wheel. Dexter quickly lunged towards Kurt, ignoring the gunfire directed at him. At that moment, Harrison turned around and saw his father coming to his rescue. His father was confronting Kurt. Terrified, Harrison ran and hugged Dexter tightly. However, they inadvertently let Kurt escape. Dexter didn't stay long, and the two quickly got into their car and drove away. But the trouble didn't end there. During lunchtime, Angela's subordinate informed her of Dexter's attack on the drug lord. Fortunately, the police intervened in time, preventing any fatalities. But soon after, the drug lord died. The cause of death was determined to be a drug overdose. This led the police to suspect Dexter's involvement. Angela was determined to investigate the truth. She sought out a drug dealer in town. After a beating, he confessed that before the attack, Dexter had stabbed something in his neck. But thanks to the police, he only suffered minor external injuries. Angela began to have doubts. She temporarily took pictures of the evidence and brought it back for further investigation. Back at the police station, Angela questioned her subordinate about the final details of the drug lord Jasper's case. Her subordinate handed her the crime scene report from that day. However, Angela suspected Jasper might have done something reckless, knowing he'd been discovered. Her subordinate disagreed, however, because Jasper had been held for 24 hours and died within 10 hours of his release. Angela immediately went to the morgue for further examination. When they turned Jasper's body over, she clearly saw an injection mark in his neck, just as the thug had described. Filled with doubts, Angela continued reviewing documents, notes, and researching online. Though she didn't want to believe it, she knew Dexter was definitely involved in Jasper's death. Meanwhile, Dexter and his son had arrived home. He told Harrison everything, explaining that he specialized in stopping murderers from harming innocent people. But the truth is, he never told his son that he was a serial killer who eliminated evil people. For example, he once killed a child murderer. Each time he committed a murder, he performed a ritual, tying the victim to a table as a form of sacrifice to the gods. Then he would give them drugs to increase their arousal and create a false crime scene to mislead anyone if discovered. Harrison always thought his father was on the side of justice, so he was very happy. Seeing Seeing Harrison's expression, Dexter decided to clean up all traces to prevent his son from finding out. Dexter secretly transported Eric's body to the warehouse, where he usually committed his crimes, and began sawing and dismembering the body into pieces, just like he did with other evil people. At this time, Angela found documents about the murders. Coincidentally, all the victims had a needle mark on their necks. This made her even more certain that Dexter was the serial killer. However, he was still unaware of it. He and his son were still enjoying a cheerful Christmas morning. Dexter gave Harrison a hunting rifle for self-defense. Then, acting like a devoted father, he taught his son how to shoot. Harrison showed great aptitude, even shooting better than his father. Next, Harrison asked about their plan to deal with Kurt. Harrison feared Kurt would return for revenge. However, Dexter didn't intend to say he would kill Kurt. He simply replied that he was looking for a way. Harrison suddenly remembered he hadn't given his father a gift, so he took out a drawing he had made of his aunt from his backpack. She was also Dexter's sister. The two continued their cheerful celebration with Angela and her daughter. When they entered, Angela didn't know how to react, as she was already suspicious of Dexter. Just when the atmosphere was at its most tense, Kurt peered at their house. But Dexter and Angela weren't ready to expose Kurt's actions in front of Angela. They continued their charade, filling the house with tension. As soon as Kurt left, Dexter and Harrison excused themselves and left. They got into their car and chased after Kurt. But then Dexter remembered they first needed proof of Kurt's crime. Serial killers often keep some objects or photos of their victims as trophies after each crime. Harrison used a drone to observe from above. Once they had gained his trust, he recounted the attack and how he fabricated the story to escape punishment. What Harrison wanted was to be seen as a hero, so he planned to self-harm and bravely fight back, earning praise from the entire school. Dexter felt relieved that Angela could be honest with him. At that moment, he discovered Kurt's hiding place. They waited until nightfall to act. But first, Dexter had to call Angela to find an excuse to be absent tonight. Then he went to the warehouse to get a knife, preparing for the upcoming confrontation. Meanwhile, Kurt wasn't sitting still either. He assembled a gun and sneaked to Dexter's house. Then he started pouring gasoline around the house and set it on fire. He wanted the fire to lure the two out so he could shoot them from a distance. Unfortunately, they weren't home, because at that moment, Dexter and Harrison had arrived at Kurt's secret base. When Dexter found the entrance to the basement, Harrison discovered that he had installed surveillance cameras there. As a result, Kurt discovered someone sneaking down to his secret basement. The trip was a waste of time. He angrily rushed back. At the same time, the two had arrived, and in the middle of the room was a large table. All around were scattered tools used for dismembering and embalming bodies. As they ventured deeper inside, they discovered boxes containing the bodies of murdered and embalmed girls that Kurt had kept as trophies. This proved he had been killing for decades. Realizing something, Harrison turned to Dexter and asked if he intended to kill Kurt like the clown who murdered children. Overwhelmed with rage, Dexter no longer pretended and confessed to being a serial killer. He had killed many other bad guys. Harrison expected him to object, but instead he quickly supported his father's actions. Meanwhile, Kurt rushed home to pack his belongings and money to escape. But before he could leave, Dexter and Harrison arrived. Kurt was knocked unconscious and tied to an operating table. When Harrison questioned why they had used so many plastic sheets, Dexter explained that it was to wrap everything more cleanly and quickly. Harrison was a little scared, as this was his first time facing murder. But thinking about how his father eliminated evil to save others, he became braver. Kurt woke up to find himself bound. He understood that death was imminent. He struggled and begged for his life. He confessed to all his crimes, including the murder of the girl named Iris. Furthermore, Kurt claimed that he had freed those women from their harsh lives. They preferred death to suffering. He confidently believed that preserving the victims' bodies beautifully and neatly was proof of his ideals. But those pleas were completely useless. Seeing this, Kurt turned to Harrison and told him that Dexter had killed his son. But Dexter didn't let Kurt finish. Because Matt was a bastard who had caused the deaths of 5 other people, he perfectly fit Dexter's code of conduct. Soon, Dexter covered Kurt's mouth and stabbed him in the stomach. Then, Dexter changed into protective clothing and began dismembering Kurt's body. Harrison, being just a boy not yet 20 years old, didn't dare watch any further. He went upstairs to wait for his father. When they finished, the two threw the body bag into the incinerator to dispose of the evidence. When Harrison feared that people would become suspicious because Kurt was missing, Dexter reassured him that when the police arrived, they would find the house ransacked and think he had fled. After finishing, they quickly returned home, only to find nothing left. The house had been burned to ashes, surrounded by police and firefighters. Angela suspected her 2 children had perished in the fire, so she pressed Dexter for information about their whereabouts. Dexter fabricated an excuse for their absence the previous night. Having nowhere else to go, they were temporarily staying at Angela's house. When she took them home, she received an anonymous letter accusing Dexter of murdering Matt, accompanied carried by a medical pin. At this point, Angela no longer suspected anything, but she didn't immediately expose her boyfriend's crime. Over the next few days, she secretly monitored his actions. She then instructed her subordinates to contact reporter Molly Puck. Unfortunately, Puck had long since become Kurt's target and had been murdered by him. Next, Angela confronted Dexter, telling him that someone had deliberately set fire to his house. The police wanted to know if he had recently made any enemies. While Dexter was still trying to cover up the truth, Harrison approached and revealed that he had been in a fight with a friend 2 days prior, so they could face retaliation. To keep his son safe, he suggested they move out of town and back to Miami. Clearly, Angela had discovered something. She actually knew the whole truth. After a period of internal struggle, Angela decided to question Dexter about what he had done. Then, she pointed a gun at him. Before Dexter could understand what was happening, Angela's subordinates arrived and handcuffed him. He was ultimately convicted, killing Matt. Harrison was very worried about his father, but he wasn't allowed inside. In the interrogation room, Angela sat opposite Dexter and began asking questions. Of course, he still responded fluently without a single flaw. Next, Angela produced a sample of a medical pin that had been inserted into Matt's leg. He had suffered an injury and had needed screws to fix the bone. They were all found in the ashes at Dexter's house. But Dexter immediately tried to blame Kurt for killing his own son. Because he had always considered Matt useless, he unfortunately committed manslaughter in a fit of rage. Afterward, Kurt blamed Dexter because he was Chief Angela's boyfriend. He set the house on fire and buried the nail in the ashes, all as revenge for Angela arresting him for the death of her best friend. Hearing this, Angela's subordinates were also swayed by Dexter's story. He told Angela that his account was credible and that the jury would believe him in court. Knowing he had the upper hand, Dexter waited for Harrison, and they planned to leave in 2 days. However, he would still be detained for 24 hours. He would only be released if the police had no further compelling evidence. Logan then sought out Harrison for further testimony. He replied that he hadn't been in town when the crime occurred and therefore knew nothing. However, in reality, Harrison had been secretly following Dexter for a long time before finding him. After following his father into the woods, he witnessed the entire scene of his father killing Matt. At this point, Angela decided to give Dexter one last chance. She called the Miami Police Department and received confirmation that Dexter was the serial killer. But they questioned why she was asking this, because according to the report, Dexter had died 10 years ago. Angela then sent a photo of herself with Dexter, leaving the officer speechless. He asked for the town address and quickly brought the supplementary documents to Angela. Just then, the police received news of Kurt's disappearance. He had only left behind his truck and a large can of gasoline in the back. Everything was now clear. This time, Dexter was almost impossible to deny. Once again, he was taken to the interrogation room. Angela suspected that Dexter had killed Kurt as well. She presented a series of evidence that made it difficult for him to deny. Angela was gradually uncovering many previous cases. Dexter's sentence was to be taken to Florida for trial. At this point, Dexter asked Angela to turn off the camera, promising to confess. But instead of admitting his actions, he exposed all of Kurt's crimes. All the missing victims Angela had been searching for were in Kurt's secret bunker. Seeing Dexter's sincerity, Angela decided to trust him one more time. It wasn't a lie. She was shocked to see the bodies of the victims she had been hunting for all this time. Angela quickly called Logan, but by then, Dexter had subdued him, and unfortunately, he was hit by a stray bullet and died. It was absolutely not Dexter's intention to kill the police officer. Then Dexter fled to pick up Harrison. At this point, the shocking events forced Angela to mobilize forces from the state and the FBI. Upon returning to the police station, she discovered Logan dead, and Dexter had vanished without a trace. Dexter had arrived at the meeting point with Harrison, but he quickly realized something was amiss. Dexter had called him using Logan's phone. Upon learning that his father had killed an innocent person, his attitude changed. Dexter tried to explain that it was the only way. The two began arguing over their differing actions. Harrison advised Dexter to turn himself in to pay the price. Dexter was disappointed to hear this from his own son, as going to court could lead to a conviction and death. Dexter tried to leave, but Harrison used a gun to force him to stop, to end everything, and allow him to die peacefully. Dexter demanded that his son shoot, because that was the only way he could make amends to Harrison. Ultimately, Dexter was shot by his own son. He fell to the snow. When Angela arrived, Harrison hastily confessed to killing Dexter, but she didn't arrest him as planned. She believed it was an act of making evil pay for its crimes. She gave him money and advised him to flee. Then she proceeded to wipe away the fingerprints he had left behind so he could leave safely. At that moment, Harrison discovered a letter Dexter intended to send to someone. Inside were heartfelt words about his love for his son. It's unclear what Harrison thought when he read those words, but by then, it was too late to turn back. Dexter had used his death to protect his son and atone for his past mistakes. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, but chose to use violence to quell violence. violence. Dexter's act of killing the bad guys wasn't entirely right, but because of loopholes in the law, many bad guys have escaped punishment. What he did was seen as a small act of justice in a world full of injustice. The value of a film lies in its reputation, while the value of a film review lies in the feelings it evokes. That's the end of today's story. Thank you for watching. What did you think of this film? Don't forget to leave your thoughts below. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.